Senior Planning Policy Officer at Reigate and Banstead Council. So yeah, just a quick structure of what I'm going to go over today. So I'm going to do a quick overview of our design code and the process we've been through. Then I want to look at some of the opportunities for DM and then the challenges for DM. Take a bit of a look at the code in practice that we've got and then how the code fits. Okay, so I'd just like to start with a brief overview. So we've got our A23 Great Street Design Code, SBD, and we chose this name because we have a focus area of the A23 corridor between our major settlements south of the borough, between Red Hill and Hawley, both of which are settlements with opportunities for development. So the image on the right shows the red line of the A23, which hopefully you can see. And just a bit of context around the area as well. There's Gatwick Airport in the south, and the Surrey Hills and the M25 to the north of that red dotted line there. And then the A23 is identified as a primary street that is a key transport route for the borough, but it's also a street where people live and work. So we've seen over the years the street element being stripped away, and it's become a bit of a barrier, and it's in need of design improvements to create a better place for the community. So our design code focuses on this area and applies to development that interfaces the street. So we have been part of the Design Code Pathfinder group on our design code since 2022. We've appointed urban design specialists to help us develop our design code into an SBD. And we had a design code adopted quite recently on June 20th, 2024. I don't actually have the timeframes displayed, but we have a very similar timeframe to what Nick was saying in Uttlesford. And yeah, we just had a bit of later consultation in them. But yeah, so going into a bit more about our design codes, the code was developed using existing policy and best practice on the national, regional, and local level. RBBC is a district council with Surrey County Council as the highways authority, and they developed a design code of their own called Healthy Streets SPD, which was helpful in helping us shape our own design code. And then we've got a diagram on the bottom here. It's just a sort of simplified illustration of our process in developing the design code. Firstly, we looked at what we call the grand challenges, which are sort of the national challenges that we are facing, such as climate change and health. Then we took these grand challenges and identified public value whilst also understanding the context of the area through public engagement. And then this helps us frame the ambitions of the codes to create a great street, to better add public value, which was also subject to public consultation. And then finally, we developed the codes and refined them to adopt as an SPD. So just going to speak now on the opportunities of the code. So as an adopted SPD, the A23 Great Street Design Code excuse me, is a material consideration and will therefore improve design quality and will have a more consistent good design. Applicants will grow more confident understanding the codes in time and will use it to inform their early design with officers and pre-app stage, and for officers it will help them inform their decisions. So yeah, on pre-apps, the opportunities for dialogue early on is for what design is required will help inform any future developments along the A23 corridor for our area. It'll provide a tool that DM officers can use to seek improvements to their schemes in search of connectivity, street layouts, and design before an application is even submitted. Design code that DM officers and internal stakeholders have been part of from early development is key to what we were trying to produce. So DM have been engaged throughout the process of our design code from the initial beginning all the way through to adoption. So they have an understanding of what the SPD requires and what will be involved for any future evolutions of the design code as well. And then lastly, it can help avoid appeals or create new layer of defense for appeals. So This is one of our aims when talking to DM officers, and this is because the design code clarifies in stricter terms what is acceptable design for an area and can easily explain why a scheme may not be well designed. So at Reigate and Banstead Council, we are yet to test our design code at an appeal, but our officers have received training with the design code and they're growing in confidence to be able to do that in the future. So a bit more on the challenges now. So as a SPD, the design code guidance needs to be balanced against other competing factors such as viability and weight given to housing needs. This could mean that even schemes that are not fully compliant with the design code may be considered acceptable in the planning balance in the grand scheme of things. And then ambitions of the design code can be difficult due to the piecemeal nature of DM. So some of the small scale schemes that come forward along the A23 corridor could find it quite difficult to be effective in enhancing the wider area and the ambitions of our code. So for example, our code includes a segregated bidirectional cycle track on the eastern side of the A23, but that could be quite difficult for a small scheme to integrate. And then our BBC is a district council with Surrey County Council as the highways authority. So the design code we have is highways heavy, and this can be a challenge for our DM officers as street improvements will require Surrey County Council input. Then this can add another layer of challenge to the process. And then finally, the buy-in. So this ties into what I was saying before, and it will require time for highways authority to be involved, developers, residents, and so on for their buy-in requirements, and for them to be brought into the whole guidance and requirements of the design code. So this is proving a difficult challenge at the early stages currently, which is why we're wanting to look at the next phase of our design code, which is digitizing our code. We feel that this could help create a better awareness for the design code for developers and residents, and hopefully will help improve usability of the code overall. But yeah, overall, the codes will need agreement between all involved parties, so the realized ambitions can be made. Okay, so just want to talk about the code in practice now. So when developing the code, we've tried to make it clear for all users, but especially for DM officers. When developing the code, we identified design code enhancement sites along to A23. These are opportunities for development sites. Some of these have been used as case study examples as to how the code can be applied. There's an illustration here on the slide, but this is more for illustrative purposes. It's not meant to dictate the design. It's not meant to show how the code should be, but it's meant to be an illustrative example of how the codes could be applied to a scheme. So in this diagram here, we've got you might not be able to see, but there's a sort of Google image on the bottom left of a Ford garage on the right-hand side. This is a potential development interfacing the A23. So this is an illustrative scheme of how these codes could be applied going forwards. Okay, so the A23 street has a variety of environments it passes through, and that means of varying width as well. So we have a chapter within our SVD that helps identify varying street typologies. We have 10 street typologies, which are based on the Surrey County Council Healthy Streets Design Code. And this can help DM officers pinpoint recommended dimensions and the relevant codes to be applied for the street typology. So it's going a bit further step than guidance by giving a hand for DM to say what is required and the guidance as well. So during the process of the design code, we sought the use of compliance checklists because of how useful they can be for officers to assess an application. When we were developing SPD, we gained feedback from senior DM officers about inputting a compliance checklist, and they expressed that it was not widely used before amongst themselves, but it was one that they thought would be helpful, and it would be helpful in building a picture of how compliant the scheme is overall. So we do have a client compliance checklist at the end of each chapter. It remains to be seen at the moment how effective it is. It's still quite early on in our process, but we do understand from some of the concerns expressed previously from DM that it might be a bit time consuming. And then when schemes only meet some of the codes, um, how that will be assessed. So we are keen to review this in about a year's time, and speak with our DM team on an ongoing process to learn from their involvement with compliance checklists. But so far, so good with the positive experience. Um, Again, so just a little bit on how our code fits. When developing the design code, we were initially unsure which route we would go down in terms of the status of the code. So we saw the benefits of adopting the design code as an SPD, but there were challenges to the wording we could use. We tried to keep as much of the must wording and the requirements as possible that Matt was alluding to before. But as an SPD, we are unable to introduce new policies, so we had to be considerate to installing guidance as well. And as I mentioned before, we are still early in our process for testing the code, but and it's also quite a niche area that we're looking at in terms of our borough is looking at a certain stretch of the corridor. But it is the material consideration now as a SPD. So it will be interesting to learn if if a scheme is considered compliant with parts of the code, but not all of it, and how much weight is given to this by officers. But ultimately, this will be known and tested at appeals, which is why it's important for our officers to have that early buy-in to get confidence with using it. And then just lastly, I just wanted to finish on how we're basically not done yet. So our code is adopted, but we still have tests to review it. And we're looking at next stage, as mentioned earlier, about our digitization. We currently have a 3D model of our design code area, which our DM team are currently using as a tool to assess large application schemes along the A23. We currently have about one on the A23. So we were a bit unfortunate that our adopted design code sort of missed the pre-application stage of it, but we expect to use the design code for the full application. But we're testing that in our model, and we're also exploring how we can use this model for our future digitization, and exploring spatial mapping to help our DM officers furthermore, but also for developers as well to utilize this tool. And that's me, so I'll stop sharing.